So, it's been 2 days since the launch of PSVR2, and in that time I have beaten Horizon Call of the Mountain. Also, I won't be talking about narrative spoilers in this video, I won't be talking about the narrative itself in depth, so don't worry about that, but I will be playing footage from different parts of the game and showing off basically every enemy that you fight, so if you don't want to see any of that, this probably isn't the review for you, or close your eyes if you see combat, so just to give you a heads up. Anyway, this was one of my most hyped titles for the headset, but did it really live up to the hype? For context, I'm a Horizon fan, I've played Horizon Zero Dawn, have been holding off on Forbidden West until it drops in price, but luckily I can say you don't have to play Forbidden West to get the story in Call of the Mountain. Overall, the game did blow me away, and that's the biggest praise I can give it, is that it had many moments where I just stood there and took in the scenery or what was happening around me in pure wonder. And that's where my first good point comes in for this game, and that is the visuals. One thing I loved about Horizon was its world. The primal, more animalistic nature of the human race combined with an old and forgotten mechanical and built up and futuristic humanity presented in Zero Dawn, with the old ones being us modern humans, lost to the distant past with relics like crashed helicopters, massive buildings and structures, and of course, remnants of the killing machines that wiped out the old humanity. And I'm glad to say all of these are encapsulated and enhanced by Horizon Call of the Mountain in its 3D world in real scale, and marveling at some of these things took up a lot of my playtime, to be honest. Sure, the more luscious forests and the huge mountains and different peaks to climb look incredible, the game does nail the natural side of things, but there are a few caveats to that I'll get into later in my negative section, but for the most part they all look incredible. But I think where the game really shines is the more industrial places, surprisingly. I didn't expect that, but it really does. Especially the size of the machines. The visuals in this game make them look huge, and this flat screen that you're seeing right now really doesn't do it justice. The machines feel far more imposing than they do on the flat screen like in Zero Dawn or Forbidden West, because they're really coming at you and they seem gigantic. The Thunderjaws and the Stormbirds, they're imposing, they're really terrifying when you fight them, and it justifies the bullet spongy nature of them because you see how huge they are, you can see their weak spots a lot easier because it's your own eyes that are looking at them, and your own aim with your bow. And overall this game just nails that feeling of scale, which is really important for VR. The moment of the tall neck walking past in the opening river ride section, my jaw was on the floor. It was nuts. Anyway, enough with me gushing over the visuals, although there are, as I said, a few caveats to them. I will get onto that at the end in my negative section. But let's talk a little bit about the story now, because to be honest, it's alright. It serves its purpose to set up a bunch of set pieces for you to play through, and I think it serves it alright. The character motivations are decent, but to be honest, a lot of the time I did just tune Reyes out and the other characters, because a lot of them are dicks. And Reyes does talk a lot. I wasn't expecting this much character dialogue. It's not written awfully, it's not voice acted awfully, definitely not, but it's just something that I wasn't really that interested in, and I wanted to feel like I was playing as the character and not really hearing the character's thoughts and embodying a body that isn't my own. But yeah, anyway, the story itself, nothing too spectacular, but it does allow you to traverse through a lot of really nice looking locations, some locations you'll recognize from the games, and it was enough to keep me engaged for 7 or so hours. But what are you actually doing for those 7 hours? Well, mostly climbing, from what I heard from other reviewers, and while that is correct, there's more combat than I thought there would be, or more encounters where you face machines, should I say. Some encounters have you avoiding them, some have you fighting them, but that are enough to satisfy you throughout the runtime, and not just keep you climbing and bored for the entire playthrough. There are also puzzles to solve, but these are very simple, and probably won't challenge you unless you're 12 years old, but they're fun enough, and they are rewarding because you're really lifting the puzzle pieces and moving them with your hands in VR, and I think that does help immerse you into the experience. I do have to say though, climbing feels really good. The haptics in the controllers are awesome for this, helping you grip onto different surfaces and feel different textures. You get a lot of different tools to help you traverse, like your pickaxes and some grapples that you can throw. There's a lot of different tools to play around with as you progress through the game, and you get them right until the very end, so it does keep you engaged with new things to try out, and you use them all fairly often, and I liked all of these gameplay mechanics. But anyway, how is the combat? Well, I'll save the negatives of the combat for the end of the video with the rest of the bad things, But the positives of the combat are that it does feel rewarding. Chipping armor off machines with your real bow, aided by eye tracking, because let's be honest, I'm not as accurate as you're seeing on screen right now. The game does give you aim assist with where you're looking. It's not completely foolproof, and if you absolutely fire it into a different direction, it won't hit the target you want, but it does help you quite a bit. But chipping these armor off the machines, taking their health down, and watching them explode is a very fun gameplay loop, and once again the haptics in the controllers really help with the combat feel. There are 2 weapons that you get throughout the playthrough, but I did only really stick to the bow because the other slingshot isn't the most viable I found. But Reyes' bow has enough of the trick type of arrows, like the blaze arrows, the hunter arrows, the precision arrows, and the shock arrows. They're all fun to use, they're all viable in their own way, and it did keep the gameplay feeling fresh. One aspect I was a massive fan of was actually the way you construct the arrows when you want to make more of them. You don't just hold the button like you do in the Horizon flat screen games, you actually attach these parts to your arrow and create it with your own hands, which I think is really cool. The tools do the same thing. Once you find each of the parts for your new tools, you go back to camp and you put the tools together yourself. These are just really neat and immersive features and add to the combat and traversal, and trying to create these arrows in the heat of the moment, even though it does slow down time for you so you can do it and enemies don't attack you, does feel pretty tense, and I like that a lot. But overall combat is satisfying and fun to play around with, and doesn't feel too repetitive. I think it helps that there aren't tons and tons of combat situations. There are enough to keep you satisfied, at least for me, but it didn't feel repetitive or boring by the end of it because of the enemy variety and because of the different methods of taking down the weak spots and the different combinations of enemies that they throw at you and in the different scenarios that you have with them. I also just want to quickly mention sound design and music. Let's get the less hype part of this out of the way. The sound design is pretty good. It's very solid, it keeps you immersed, and I think the Tempest audio with the headphones really help. This technology is pretty nuts. I've experienced it in some other games, but in Horizon, it's also amazing, and I also think it helps with the headset haptics rumbling at the same time as the amazing soundscapes happen. Say as a stormbird flies over you, the headset rumbles, and you hear that whoosh go past you. It's pretty nuts. I think they do a good job on the sound design. But where I was really impressed was with the music, because I can't really describe it. I'm not an audiophile, I'm not the most versed in how to describe music or why it's good, but just have a little listen to some of this. Okay. Oh my god, what a moment. Oh, what a reward, man. Didn't realise the trailer music would be in here, but it is, which I welcome. So yeah, some of the music tracks are absolutely stunning, and they line up with the gameplay really well. The devs chose the timing of these tracks pretty perfectly, so big thumbs up on that one. I want this on vinyl if it's available. That would be very cool. Please do that, Gorilla, please. So, with all of those positive things out the way, and me gushing this game's praises for like 9 minutes, let's go on to some of the negatives. And unfortunately, there are a few, but it wasn't really enough to bring the experience down too much for me. So let's start with the visuals. Now, while the visuals of this game are stunning, they suffer from an effect called reprojection. This is a double imaging effect where the game runs at 60 FPS in the headset but is then reprojected to 120 to reduce your motion sickness and keep the gameplay experience more smooth. You won't be able to see this really on the recording because the recording itself is 60 FPS, but in the headset it seems like there are 2 of everything when you're turning. It's not completely awful, it's not unplayable, and you can turn off smooth turning and go back to snap turning if you want to negate it a bit, but I personally like smooth turning and kept it on, and I did notice this double imaging effect quite a lot. It's fairly hard to explain, but once you're in the headset you really do see it, and it makes the visuals a little blurry when turning quickly. However, it wasn't really a deal breaker because you're not exactly spinning around too much when you're just traversing the world from section to section. Overall, the visuals are incredible, and I wouldn't really let this deter anyone from playing the game. And chances are, if you're new to VR, you'll want to keep snap turning on anyway, so this won't be too big of an issue for you. Okay, now let's talk about another visual issue that is just something I've seen throughout the PSVR2 headset completely, but it does rear its head in Horizon a little bit, and that is that PSVR2 and the PS5 don't seem to handle foliage that well, especially foliage in the distance. I noticed this at first when playing Kayak VR Mirage. The trees in the distance looked a lot more blurry than they did on PC VR. It wasn't awful, but it was noticeable, and this does carry over to Horizon, but to a lesser extent. Some distant trees can look a little fuzzy. The foveated rendering does help because it locks onto where your eyes are positioned and increases the resolution of what you're looking at, but it still is a little fuzzy in places. But to be honest, this is such a minor nitpick and you won't really notice it while you're traversing the world and playing through the game, but it is worth noting that foliage can be a little fuzzy. That's why I said I prefer the more industrial buildings, because they look crystal clear. Rock faces look crystal clear as well. It's just in greenery, unfortunately, but it's not a deal breaker, as I said. Okay, let's get on to combat, and this was a little bit of a mixed bag for me at first because the combat was limited. What I mean by that is that the movement locks you to a ring around your opponent, no matter what the opponent is, and it means you can't really freely move around the environment while fighting them. I actually think this works fairly well for this introductory game because it's an arena style fight, and I think for new players this will be a lot more manageable than just free movement, and I understand why they took this liberty, but it is a little disappointing not having free movement in fights. But to be honest, it worked better than I thought it would. It's just a tiny bit disappointing. Another one with the combat is the poor weapon choice. There are only 2 weapons to choose from, but I really didn't find the slingshot viable much at all. Maybe on my second playthrough I'll use it more and find that it's actually really good, but for the most part I just stuck with the bow and didn't find the other weapon choice appealing in the slightest. What I can say though is that the amount of gadgets used to traverse the map are abundant, so don't worry about that. To be honest, that kind of makes up for it, so not too sorry about that either. And my final negative about Horizon Call of the Mountain is actually to do with its narrative and the way it brings you back to base camp to construct your weapons and choose your missions. The narrative will be interrupted by you returning to a main hub area with a couple of NPCs you can interact with, but to be honest, I really wasn't bothered about talking to them in the slightest and just went back there to construct my new equipment. This in itself isn't too bad. I mean, you can talk to the NPCs if you want, I just personally didn't. And it is a nice feature to have there, but the moment that I ran into a problem with it was later on in the narrative. Now, without spoiling anything, you're on a pretty intense chase after a certain someone, and the game just brings you back to camp to set you a new mission to continue you on your quest. It is technically necessary for the narrative, but it does just stop that momentum, and I found myself thinking, really, I'm going on a fetch quest when I really want to be going after this character? And it did kind of kill it a little bit for me in that moment, and this happens a couple times where I'm really getting into something and I'm brought back to Dawn's Grasp, I think it's called, and you sit there and you construct something or you talk to an NPC, and it's just not that engaging. But I do understand why they had to do it for a narrative purpose. I just want to add in a little comment about the river ride here as well. This doesn't come under negatives, it'll be its own little section, but there is a river ride that you can go on in this game called Machine Safari that I thought would just be a bit gimmicky, and to an extent it is. It's essentially a boat ride that you can see on screen now that takes you through a river and takes you through all of the different enemy types and showcases them without you having to worry about fighting them in combat, because you're just looking at them going about their daily lives, fighting each other, and giving you a spectacle to look at. I thought this would be really naff, to be honest, but it's not. I would actually recommend putting people who come over to your house maybe to demo the VR headset on this or Kayak VR, as I said in my Kayak video, because both of them kind of serve the same purpose of showing them a visual spectacle, but in terms of action and immersing them in something that's kind of wonderful to watch, the Horizon River Ride is a lot better than I thought it would be. Seeing the machines battle it out in front of you, flying over you with the headset haptics and the controller haptics going off and the massive immersive sound design, it was pretty incredible, and I didn't expect it to be this good, so I would say give it a go. It doesn't take long and it's pretty cool. Anyway, that is all of my thoughts, the positives and negatives. As you can see from the runtime, there are a lot more positives than negatives, but would I actually recommend this game, and did it live up to the hype? Now, I bought the bundle with the PSVR2 with Horizon, so I got £10 off my purchase of the game, and for that price, I'm not sure I would still recommend it. I would maybe drop it down to £40 instead of $50, and maybe consider waiting for a sale unless you are a big fan of the Horizon universe or it really appeals to you. If you're on the fence, I would say sit out for a little bit until the price drops, because I think I got about 7 hours out of the main campaign. Granted, I could have explored a little more and kind of taken in the view for a little while, but I did want to get this review out, so I did power through it fairly quickly, but I still felt like I took my time in various places. But I would say that it's almost worth full price. This is a premium AAA VR title, and I'm kind of conflicted saying wait for a sale, because it truly is breathtaking, especially if you've only experienced PSVR before. Coming to this will be ridiculously immersive. But there are just a few drawbacks to it, including the runtime, the double imaging, the poor weapon choice, the limited combat, and the narrative momentum being killed a little bit, that bring it down just a notch for me. However, this game still is absolutely stellar, and if you have any interest in it at all and you do have the money to spare, I would say go for it. But for that casual VR fan who doesn't really like Horizon too much or isn't too interested and wants something that isn't too linear and is a bit more freeing in terms of its gameplay, maybe sit this one out until it goes on sale. Anyway, that is my review of Horizon Call of the Mountain. This has been a little bit of a different video. Usually I intersplice the video with some gameplay, kind of add some humor to it, but I did just want to get a serious review out of this game because it's a lot of money. A lot of the other games I cover are fairly cheap, and you can just kind of buy them, have some fun, and if you don't like it, you haven't spent too much. But Horizon is quite a big investment monetarily, so I wanted to put a more serious review out. So I hope you did enjoy. If you have played the game, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. If you haven't, let me know what you're thinking about it now that you've watched this, and I hope to see you in the next video. And if you do want to subscribe, please consider it, because it helps me out a lot and it's very, very free. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.